Like all the other slides, here is my blog page to download the actual PowerPoint for this video if you'd like to. So also, like I do with the other poems, I like to give you some key vocab that I may say during the slides and also to help you to improve your vocabulary in your essays. A key word today that I will say is the word impudent, which means not powerful. Really good for this poem because all the poor in this poem are impudent and unable to fight back. So this poem is rich with a lot of history and background. So whilst I will give you some of the basics, it will be key that you look into this further for yourselves. So this poem was written in 1792, which is right in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. So for those of you who might not know what that is, the Industrial Revolution was a key time where our industries revolutionized. They changed. We saw huge changes to the way we worked, to the introduction to steam factories, to coal, steamship trains, things like that. And at the very key point of all this was that our country really grew in our economy as well. Now, key to that as well was cities like London, Manchester, and Liverpool. London was central to all of this, and people would flock to the cities for their work in factories. Hence, there was a lot of overcrowding. You had often families of 2 or 3 families crammed into these awful buildings with not even the basic necessities, and there was a huge volume of poverty as a result. Children were key to work in factories. Now, they were exploited and used, and there were no rules on age restrictions, well, not until a long time anyway. It wasn't until 1819 where eventually children under the age of 9 were then banned, but still from 9 onwards, you could still work. And children were used to get into those small machines as well, and people treated them as if they were merely an object, really. Now, you've got to imagine that in London at the time, there was a huge amount of overcrowding, but also really poor hygiene, which meant that diseases spread rapidly and there was a large amount of deaths too. You also had a very high infant mortality rate. That just means a high amount of children dying, and you can see that awful figure there of children dying before their second birthday. Now, if you want to read further, I have attached an article at the bottom if you do want to download these slides. Now, also, you do need to know about Blake, and if you were to study further at English literature, A level or university, you would learn about this person. Now, Blake, he was poor himself, so therefore he understood the life of the poor in his poem today. He lived in London his whole life, so he understood what it was like there. He wrote this poem as part of a collection of other poems called Songs of Experience. The most important thing I want you to take away is that Blake also believed in God. Now, he believed in God, but he was against the church. So he would practice his belief at home and didn't believe in going to institutions like the church, criticized them, in fact, for not helping others and for being hypocritical in the way they were. Blake was from a dissenting family, which means they went against the church as well. So you will see this in the key metaphor of the blackening church in the poem later. The structure of this poem is beautiful. It's great and easy to comment on. Now, Blake uses this poem's rhyme and structure and the stanzas to show you 2 messages. The repeated structure in this poem, 1, shows you yet that the poor are trapped, but the repetition of things like the rhyme scheme and the stanzas being the same shows that this idea that the poor will never escape. Also, it's showing that the control of the government will carry on it. There's no hope to stop it. There's no hope in helping the poor. So please remember that this poem has a regular rhyme scheme, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, H, G, H, and every stanza is the same size. Both of these together give you the messages that the poor cannot escape. Also, another beautiful thing to remember about the structure is that Blake uses a very clever thing called anaphora, which is a type of repetition where you repeat something. Now, they do show those messages through anaphora, and you can see it here in every. It's at the start. That could reflect how they start each day the same way. The poor and citizens can't escape. There's no hope for that change. Here's the poem. What I'd like you to do is just pause the video and read through it at least twice. I've got keywords on the side if you don't understand what they are. And like I do with the other slides as well, please understand that you cannot say the word when you're analysing keywords. It's actually part of your AO2 assessment objective 2 that you are to say specifically the adjective, for instance, the adjective charted. Right, so let's go through the poem then, line by line. So I wander through each charted street, a really powerful opening. It's funny, really, because wander is the idea of being quite free. You don't know where you're going. You've got no restrictions. So the speaker is wandering through London, or so he thinks, because he wanders through charted streets. Now, streets are owned then. they are owned by the government legally. So in fact, whilst he thinks he's wandering, he's not. The streets he steps on are owned by the government, and he himself is owned, I suppose, as well. Now, even funnily, then you've got the idea of chartered again. He's near the chartered Thames. Now, the Thames is that famous river. If you ever watch EastEnders, I don't, certainly not Coronation Street all the way. But here you've got that the Thames is chartered, but it's still flowing. It's not like the poor. It's able to flow and fight back a bit. Not only are the streets chartered, yes, the Thames are too, but I like this idea of flow contrasting with chartered. Blake's is perhaps, as he did, he hated the government, he critiqued institutions, is showing that you can't try and control a river, you can't control nature. They're trying to control everything in their path, but can't. So he wanders through each chartered street, and as this speaker wanders, he marks in every face I meet, marks weakness, marks woe. Now, please carefully pay attention to this. The first mark means notice. So as he walks, he notices in every face sadness and weakness. It's very key that you notice that this poem has a lot of repetition of the word every. Now, that's not a word, it's an adverb, every. That's important. Everyone is upset. Everyone is crying. That large scale of poverty because of the overcrowding and because people had no hope is huge. And on their faces is marks of weakness, marks of woe. Now, this mark doesn't mean notice, it means the mark you understand. It means an actual mark on their face. I really like this image because a mark, think of a stain. If you mark something, it's really hard to remove, just like their poverty. The reason they can't get away from their poverty is because to get out of poverty, you have to be able to be educated and get a job. Now, during this time, education was not free. The poor could not get out of it. So they're marked by their weakness from working in factories as well. But it's a really harrowing image that they've got a mark on them. They're stained by their poverty and they cannot get away from it or fight back. Now, as he walks, doesn't get any better. He sees in every cry of every man and every infant's cry of fear. Now, every man is crying, so he's using sounds like he does throughout the poem, and cry is used to criticize the state of society. Everyone's crying and upset. Then you've got that man are crying. Now, it's got a capital letter for an interesting reason. It sort of links to how Blake knew the Bible very well. A man often in the Bible is seen as really powerful and a creation of God, but you've got that man have been crying. They have been suffering under the hands of other men, the government. So it could show you here that you would not expect men to be crying. And it highlights the scale of control and suffering that's been created, that they cannot fight back against the government too. And the poor children are crying, as you can see in the background. Now, that's crucial. I'll go to the anaphora in a minute. The infants are crying to show you how children were exploited. Blake really wanted to show, like he did in other poems called Infant Sorrow, which is from the same collection of poems as London, that an idea that children were doomed. They're crying in fear because they're doomed to a life of work. They don't get to be normal children. They're born and then very quickly made to work in factories. Then they're crying with fear. Now, fear is an abstract noun. That means a thing that you can't see or touch, but we know it's a thing. The children fear their life. They're fearing a life of work in workhouses, also fearing the likelihood that they will die, that they won't see their life past probably the age of 2. You've also got that anaphora that we looked at before. Everyone is crying. He's using it to show you the lack of being able to escape, really. Right, this is a very famous line in the poem. So he can hear in every voice and every ban the mind-forged manacles. And that image in the background really shows you what this means. Now, a manacle means a chain or a handcuff. So it literally means that the minds of the poor have been chained up. Now, they've been chained up to prevent them from being able to think on their own or fight back. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for how the poor have not been educated because they couldn't do. They had to pay to get an education. And if you don't let people have an education, they can't think for themselves and therefore they can't fight back. They can't think and say, hang on, this isn't right. I don't like what's happening here. It's not right. So the manacles there is showing you that they've got no free will to ever fight back against the poor. Also, it reminds me a bit of Christmas Carol, where Scrooge assumes that the poor belong in prisons because a manacle is normally associated with crime. It could reflect the stereotype that the rich had, that they were all criminals. But actually, funnily enough, the poor did often turn to a life of crime. That's why that manacle is there too. Now, if you want to think of a higher grade for here, really, he can hear the manacles. Think about that. Why can he hear it? Blake is using a sound. How can you hear it? Well, that must mean that they're being moved, that you can hear the chains being moved. Does that suggest that the poor are trying to think, they're trying to fight back, that there is some hope there? Something to think about there. Right, here's this key image that links to how Blake was against the church but was religious. Now, you've got here that the chimney sweepers are crying. Chimney sweeping was a very typical job for the poor, for children, and it was known for children being treated badly. Also, the church is black. Now, notice it's blackening. Ink means that it keeps getting worse and that no one can stop how corrupt and abusive the church is. And also the image of being black. Don't go for the whole, oh, it's soot, it's covered in horrible things. Actually, it metaphorically means it's evil and dangerous. Also, you've got this image of the palace walls. A soldier is walking past, sighing, and it's hapless, which means it's powerless. It's got no hope as well. And the soldier is sighing, perhaps to link to other sounds of crying, but that's giving up fighting for those in power because there's no quality of life to turn back to. That sigh, notice the enjambment, it's running in blood down the palace walls. The palace has got the blood of soldiers on their hands. And palace is linking to the church before. Blake is always known for disagreeing with institutions of power. So here the Buckingham Palace is getting critiqued. He's critiquing royalty for allowing the poor for being abused for so long. Right, and onto this, you've now got this image that through the streets he can hear something really important, a youthful harlot. Now, notice that phrase, but most. That means the sound you can hear the most is this sound, and it's the sound of prostitutes cursing, swearing. Really consider, why is that the loudest? Is that because crime is so loud and prominent? Also, it's through the midnight streets where crime would happen most, and that is quite a saddening thing to think about. Crime was something to turn to. But you do need to pay attention more to youthful harlot. Harlot's a prostitute. Here you've got a really uncomfortable oxymoronic phrase. That means that youthful is quite young. It keeps you thinking of images that are nice, and then harlot isn't nice at all, opposite images. And think about it, she's young, the prostitute, because she couldn't get educated and had to turn to a life of crime. I also like that she's cursing. She's not crying like everyone else. That's the first image or sound of someone being angry and maybe fighting back. She curses the newborn infant's tear and then plagues a marriage hearse. Perhaps she's blasting that newborn infant, and blast has got a really aggressive, plosive sound because it's her child as a product of prostitution. She can't look after her as well, and she's upset for that infant because its life is doomed. And a plague is a disease, so she wants to disease or infect marriage, maybe because she knows it's hopeless to get married in a time like this. And then you've got a brilliant oxymoron where a marriage is a new life and a hearse means a funeral. So it's an image that marriages are doomed, perhaps because they're going to die metaphorically thanks to things like prostitution, or even die literally because of disease. Now, very quickly, London is a brilliant poem for control, power, and abuse, and it links with the following other poems. Now, I really think it links brilliantly with Checking Out My History, because both of them are about the British government and British authority. In Checking Out My History, it's about the government controlling education in places of colonies like Guyana. And there's a great link with Mind Forge Manacles and how the minds of those were controlled, like Dem Tell Me in Checking Out My History. I'd also look at a difference between the poems that at the end of Checking Out My History fight back, gets his identity back and carved out, whereas the ABCDCD, the rhyme scheme in London, shows there will never be a fight back. Ozymandias is an also very good link. They're both abusing power, but you can contrast differences. Control lasts in London, won't stop, but it doesn't in Ozymandias, it's transient. Milas is perfect for that. They're both about British or authority in the similar sort of times as well. And you can see the difference there in control lasting compared, similarity, how they're lasting in both. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please download back onto the blog page any of these slides and research a bit further about Blake in this poem. It's a brilliant poem to analyse.